Well, welcome to Harvard Law School. And as I was saying, that if you are not law students, then be grateful that you are not in class right now, which would be tough on a gray day like this. And more importantly, you're not being cold called, which is always a good thing. My name is Ruth Okediji, and I am the faculty director for the Harvard Law School program on biblical law and Christian legal studies. Yes, there is such a thing. And it is just a joy to welcome you all here to our event this afternoon. We are excited. We've got a big audience on Zoom, and we look forward to the conversation. I am going to invite Deacon Tim O'Donnell, who is the director of the Harvard Catholic Forum, to come and give a few welcome remarks.
So thank you, Professor Okediji, for this kind welcome. We are indeed honored and delighted to be collaborating with the Harvard Law School program on biblical law and Christian legal studies in bringing Professor Arthur Brooks to the law school today. So let me extend my own words of welcome from the Harvard Catholic Forum, both to you who are with us here in person and those joining us on the live stream. And thank you to the Human Flourishing Program at Harvard, the Abigail Adams Institute, and the Harvard Christian Alumni Society for co-sponsoring today's program, as well as the John Templeton Foundation for financial support. Let me say a quick word about the Harvard Catholic Forum. We offer lectures, non-credit courses, reading groups, sacred music offerings, and other programs in which the Catholic intellectual and cultural tradition engages the academy, the professions, and the arts. Check us out at harvardcatholicforum.org to receive emails about our future programs, both in person and virtual. Join us, for example, next Thursday, February 15th, in Seaver Hall in Harvard Yard and on live stream for a talk about Benedict XVI and Nietzsche on reason and the reality of God. Today's program will be recorded and posted on the Harvard Catholic Forum YouTube channel. The recording can be accessed through the archive on the forum's website, harvardcatholicforum.org. It will also be posted at the resource library of the Biblical Law and Christian Legal Studies website. Let me get this right, at pblcls.harvard.edu. Please let friends and colleagues who couldn't be with us today know so that they can tune in later. So here are some logistics about today's program. Professor Brooks will speak for 35 or 40 minutes, and immediately after that, we will move into Q&A, finishing around 5:40. After that, please stay for the reception, have something to eat, and continue the conversation. About the Q&A, those of you who are here in person should have received a note card and pencil when you came in. If you have a question, please write it on the card. And shortly after 5:10, some of our valued student fellows will come up the aisles and collect the cards and bring them to me. I will pass on as many of the questions as I can, which will not be all of them, I can assure you. And unfortunately, we are unable to take questions from the live stream audience today. So here's something important. Please, please help us to evaluate and improve our programs by filling out our 2-minute survey after the program today. You who are here should have a paper survey you can complete with the pencil and drop in one of the baskets at the doors, either before the reception or as you leave. Zoom participants will get an online version, which again, only takes a couple of minutes to click through. Thank you again for your help on this. And now, let me ask Professor Okediji to introduce our speaker.
I still remember where I was on Harvard's campus when there was a news item that flashed across my screen saying that Arthur Brooks was going to be joining the faculty at Harvard University. And many of my students know that I like to take prayer walks around the campus and praying for students and praying for our school. And if I was not already a person of faith, I would have said there is a God. But I know that there is a God. And Professor Brooks joined the faculty here, not just in one school, but in two, the School of Business and the School of Public Policy. To say that he has been a light would be an understatement. He is the William Henry Bloomberg Professor of the Practice of Public Leadership at the Kennedy School and a Professor of Management Practice and a faculty fellow at Harvard Business School. I'd like to say that the Lord has sent him to the hardest soil at Harvard because God knew that Arthur had something to say to my colleagues there. Next, we will see him at the law school, I am sure. With wit and grace and intellect and humility, Professor Brooks has written extensively, lectured extensively, and hosted many podcasts, interviews, speaking to what I like to refer to as the living conscience of the American people. He is a man who not only writes with integrity and concision and sheer brilliance, but also with humility and compassion and a sense of urgency for what is needed in our country today. He is the author of 11 books, including, many of you know, the national bestseller, Love Thine Enemies, or Love Your Enemies. And with a book with a title like that, you can imagine what he must have to live up to. He's also the author of The Conservative Heart, The Road to Freedom. You know, he's a columnist with The Atlantic, and a columnist with the New York Times. He's written for The Art of Happiness with Arthur Brooks, a podcast. And he's co-authored with my dear friend Tyler Vanderveel, so many written words. I could spend a lot of time talking about what Arthur has done, but I also want to say something about what he is doing. In his classes, in his writing, in his meeting with students, he has constantly communicated not only a wit and a humor and a sense of compassion, but also the mentorship and the example that this generation desperately needs. People will ask about Arthur Brooks, and I will often say that it's not that he has written books, is that he himself is a book that is in writing. So it is my pleasure to present to you Professor Arthur Brooks, my friend and colleague.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Professor Akedeji, and thank you, Deacon Tim, and all of you. It's a delight to be with you here this afternoon. The Harvard Catholic Forum is a great opportunity for those of us who are practicing Catholic people to think a little bit together about what our objectives are, what our goals are, what our dreams are, and to maybe meet up with some people, those of you who aren't Catholic. If you're not Catholic and you're just curious about how we like to talk when we think we're alone, welcome. You're always welcome with us. We want you with us as much as we possibly can. Give me a call, I'll take you to Mass. And you'll always, as far as I'm concerned, you're with us in our prayers, and we love you even more when you're with us in person. I was talking to a great friend of mine earlier today. He said, "What do you have on today?" And I said, "I'm speaking to the Harvard Catholic Forum." And he said, "Does Harvard have a room small enough?" Which, of course, I mean, it's an easy joke, right? Because, I mean, it's not true. There's plenty of you, and apparently there's 7 million people on Zoom right now, which is great. But it's an easy joke to make, not just at Harvard, but almost any place. It's easy to feel like we as Catholic people who represent the Catholic faith that we're under siege. It's an easy thing to do. It's easy to become dispirited, which I don't allow myself to do. I'm a professor of happiness here. I literally teach happiness at the Harvard Business School. People don't believe it when I tell them that. They think I'm lying. But it's true. And I think that we have a responsibility to look at opportunities instead of threats. But the threats are real, so it seems. We all know that the United States and most countries around the world are becoming less faithful to traditional religion in general, and the Catholic faith in particular. Those who describe themselves as having no faith, the so-called nuns, not the good old-fashioned kind, sisters, nuns, N-O-N-E-S, that was 1% of the population when I was born. 1964, which is in the distant past, I realize, it's 33% today. 33% of Americans say they have no religious faith. Professed Catholics are quickly falling away. 67% of professed Catholics went to Mass weekly or more when I was born. 46% when my students were born and my kids. 39% today, and it's going down every year. Young Catholics in particular, those between 18 and 29, have about a 25, professed Catholics have a 25% Mass attendance rate. And then let's come to Harvard, where everything is times 10, or so it seems. It seems like we're in alien territory sometimes, and that's what I want to talk about. The opportunity that comes from being behind the lines. If I do my job, I want to try to inspire you a little bit to understand what a secular apostolate looks like when nobody knows your business, and how we can use that opportunity to lift ourselves up and lift other people up and live a joyful life as Catholic people. Now, when you see these data, people falling away, so much hostility, even open derision toward people of faith, especially people of traditional faith like Catholics, there's two strategies that often come to mind, common strategies. One is to fight fire with fire, militancy, kind of the Battle of Lepanto kind of mentality, right? Bring in a battleship, be pugilistic, aggressive, assert our rights, fight the cancel culture with our own cancel culture. This, unfortunately, tends to become a religious version of the people that we're fighting against, or we would fight against. It fills us with anger and hatred. The Buddha once said that hatred is like picking up a hot coal to throw at somebody that you hate. You're burned worst. That's also entirely inconsistent with our Catholic values, isn't it? The Battle of Lepanto notwithstanding. That's not my vocation, is to fight and hate. And I don't believe it's yours either. So I don't like that strategy. Here's another one, really another common strategy that we see. Check out and go private. Go to ground. Don't let anybody actually see what you're doing. Don't bring it up. Become a private Catholic, right? Keep it to yourself. Keep it at home, right? We don't want any problems here. But that's a problem, isn't it? That's not exactly in the spirit of the new evangelization, which exhorts us to go out into the world. We don't have a private faith, friends. We have a public faith. That's the point of Christianity. Look, if St. Paul had gone to ground, you would not be a Christian today. That's a fact. So we're not allowed to do that either. Those are bad strategies. The most common ones aren't any good. So here's what I want to do tonight. I want to propose a third way. I want to propose the strategy I'm trying to live in my life, and I recommend to you for your consideration. Not fighting on somebody else's turf and using call-out cancel culture as weapons, which is unchristian. And by the way, we're also outnumbered. And not closing ourselves off, which is a selfish and cowardly thing to do that denies our missionary vocation to bring others to truth and light. We need a new strategy. We need to subvert the culture with our love. That's what I want to talk about, how we can do it. And I want to talk about it not as just a Catholic. I want to talk about it as a Catholic social scientist. I want to tell you what my research has suggested we can use to bring other people to truth and light, using the best neuroscience and social science that is available today. We need to be, and if I do my job, I'll convince you that you can be, Catholic counterintelligence agents. So, first, we have to understand if we're trying to be subversive Catholics, what are we trying to subvert? What are we trying to subvert? It's very easy to say, well, the culture, the bad stuff, the sin, the degradation, all the things that we don't like, right? Subvert it all. But that's kind of open-ended. I defy any of you to subvert everything bad in the world. Let's get more specific. Here's what I think we need to subvert. The world's formula for happiness. See, the world has a very simple formula for you and for me and everybody else. You want to be happy? You got to do three things, three simple things. Love things, use people, worship yourself. That's the world's formula. Right? Love things. I mean, Thomas Aquinas, the greatest thinker, translating Aristotle to the modern thinkers of the time and bringing us now to the most exquisite understanding that we could have of both a Catholic life and human life, as far as I'm concerned. He said that there's 4 idols that people tend to pursue. All of us, me too, every single one of us. These are the substitutes for God that beguile us and attract us. It's only 4, and it's incredibly good social science. Here they are. You have one or more of these idols. This is what you're always pursuing when you're not proud of yourself. When you're looking back with regret on something you did. You're pursuing money, or power, or pleasure, or the admiration of other people. Those are the world's idols. When I talk about loving things, that's what it is. It's St. Thomas Aquinas' idols. And that's what the world tells you. You want to be happy? Go be successful in worldly terms. I have the data. It doesn't work. It always looks good. And the world will always offer it to you. But it doesn't work. The second part is using people. And we see this continuously. We use people as objects. We objectify people. We objectify ourselves, for Pete's sake. I'm a success machine. I'm a good student. I make a lot of money. We objectify other people for our gratification and for our needs. We step on people for our own advancement. The world says people are there for you to use. And last but not least, there's the psychodrama going inside your head all the time, and that is to worship yourself. You're the star of that psychodrama. It's your lunch, and your commute, and your studies, and your money. Worship yourself. That's the world's formula. The problem is that it leads to, not to happiness, it leads to materialism, and to cruelty, and to immorality, and to narcissism, and I could go on. But that's kind of the point, isn't it? It's the fast track to misery. But there's good news. There's a very similar formula that we as Christian people have that truly does bring happiness. The secret to happiness is a formula that's eerily similar to the world's formula. It just changes the nouns and the verbs. Here's the Catholic formula for happiness. Love people, use things, worship God. And that's what I would suggest is our methodology for subverting the world. Subverting what's wrong in the world. Go find his formula and put ours in their place. That's what I want to do with my work. That's what I want to do with my family. That's what I want to do with my life. How? My mission, and if I do my job, maybe yours too, is to subvert that formula and substitute the right one in every place that you can. So how are you going to do it? That's where it gets tricky, right? I'm going to give you what I believe are the 3 most important habits of a subversive Catholic spy mission into the world. Number 1, make your faith public. Number 2, make your faith normal. And number 3, make your faith magnetic. So how are we going to do those things? Let me talk to you about what each one of these things means, in my view, and how you can undertake these habits of highly subversive Catholics. Number 1, make your faith public. Your natural tendency, when you feel beleaguered, is to spend time with true believers. And that's, by the way, mostly what we're doing here tonight. We're with other people who more or less share our faith and share our values, and we have guests, and that's great. But I'm pretty comfortable talking in a way at the Harvard Catholic Forum that I would not be comfortable talking at the Harvard Kennedy School. Why? Because most of you share my values, I think. And it's a tendency to only be in this sort of company in church, in community organizations that share our values. And the reason is because it's the most comfortable thing. The most comfortable thing to be around people just like us. Look, that's the problem in our culture in general, not just among Catholics, is to make sure that there aren't any outsiders so you're never challenged, right? It's uncomfortable to be challenged. We make whole universities into monocultures ideologically because we're so afraid of hearing any sort of heresy with our delicate little ears. Oh, how damaging. The problem is, becoming private Catholics makes it impossible for us to have public apostolates. When we get outside the walls, metaphorical or real, we become different people, don't we? And what do we become? Usually less religious people. It's a really easy thing to do. My wife's here, and Esther, she's from Barcelona. Barcelona, for those of you who haven't been there in a long time, is a post-Christian place. You think of Spain as being this really Catholic country. Your views are outdated. It's a post-Catholic country. Barcelona, 3% of the population regularly attend Mass. Like Denmark on the Mediterranean, with worse services. So when we're there a lot. We got married almost 33 years ago in Barcelona. And her family's there. We go all the time. And her family's totally secular, like everybody else in Barcelona. There's nothing weird about them. They're not out of step with anything. They're in step with everything, on the contrary. She's found over the years that it's harder to be Catholic around them. It's harder to be herself. She wants to go home. What's home? The church. Where's the church? America. Where she actually found her faith. Where she found her Catholic faith. That's easy. That's all of us. It happens all the time. Right? Is to let other people kind of suck the enthusiasm, the esprit of religion out of us a little bit. And that's exactly what the world wants. The world wants us to go ahead and be a religious kook, but do it by ourselves on our own time and nobody's watching. That's kind of the strategy, I dare say. So what do? You have to be public on purpose and not try to be spontaneous about it. This is what I found and what my wife has found as well. How can you be an openly unashamed Catholic person? Put a crucifix on your desk so you can dedicate your work to it each day before you start, but where somebody might just see it. You're not shoving it in their face. You're not kicking down their door. Is that a crucifix on his desk? Say a quick blessing before you eat, no matter where you are. You do it at home. Do you do it at McDonald's? I know you don't eat at McDonald's, but you know what I mean. Before you take your exam, before you start your lecture, cross yourself. Offer up your work. Your apostolate is your work for your performance and for the good of the master. Now, this is not theater. These things aren't theater. This is simple Catholic life. You know, one of the great things about being Catholic, I was raised Protestant, but I found my home when I was 15, so I'm practically a cradle Catholic. The great thing about being a Catholic, among other things, is that you're putting it on your body. It's the most visceral thing when you cross yourself as part of Catholic life. Now, don't make sure other people are watching, but don't make sure they're not watching. Just do it publicly and be natural. You'd be shocked at the effect that this can have. I was giving a speech in Georgia for a large group of people at one point, a couple of years ago. That's what I do. I'm on the road about 48 weeks a year talking to almost exclusively secular audiences. I'm actually using notes right now because it's so unusual compared to the kind of speaking I ordinarily do. And in Georgia, I was giving this big speech to a large group of CEOs, business people. And before I went up, I crossed myself and thought, Lord, use my words. And afterward, this guy, he comes up to me after my speech, and he's in tears. So what I say? Sorry. They said, no, you crossed yourself before you went up there. And I thought, I want that. I haven't had that since I was a kid. I'm going back to Mass. Yeah, I don't know. You don't know. You don't know where missionary work is going to happen. be public, because you don't want to miss an opportunity. Now, this means there's no room for error. If you're going to be a public Catholic, this means nothing less than total excellence. This is an incredibly important point. Why? Because if you're a public Catholic, a lot of the time, you will be 100% of the Catholics that people know. That's a pretty bad position to be in if you're messy about your life, right? You have to be impeccable, or your witness will be the opposite of what you attend. If you gossip, people are going to say, those Catholics are a bunch of snarky jerks, right? If you sleep around, Catholics do one thing, say one thing about sex, but do none, right? If you drink too much, they'll say Catholics are drunks. They wouldn't be the first time. But most importantly of all, Harvard friends, you need to be excellent in your work. No cutting corners, no laziness, no excuses, the best. Excellence is the only way that we can live our lives. This is the reason that the Harvard Law School is the right place for excellent Catholics, and the Harvard Business School, and this great university. I know it's a secular university. I know it has problems. But let's be honest. It is, if not the best university in the world, right up there. And this is where we need to be. Because it's incumbent upon us as missionaries to be as excellent as possible. Your vocation, your professional vocation, is supposed to make people admire you, not because you're seeking that as an earthly reward, because that's their ticket to heaven. Here's some words of wisdom. I'm not going to do too many quotes tonight. God is calling you to serve him in the ordinary, material, secular activities of human life. That's St. Josemaria Escrivá in a great speech, a great homily he gave in 1968 in Navarre, Spain, called Passionately Loving the World. He waits for us every day in the laboratory, in the operating theater, in the army barracks, in the university chair, in the factory, in the workshop, in the fields, in the home, and in all the immense panorama of work. Understand this well. There is something holy, something divine, hidden in the most ordinary situations. Make people admire your excellence, and then want a little power behind it. Then refract that excellence to the source of your strength, and you know what it is. That's what public life is all about. Now, you might be thinking, by the way, this is really, really going to cut into my social and dating life if I send these signals and then all of a sudden I'm being a public Catholic. Yes, correct. You are correct. Suffice it to say that this will create what we social scientists like to call a self-selection effect, to attract the right people to you, including people who aren't Catholic yet. Dating is apostolate, just like everything else. All right, of those of you who are married, don't date. Okay. Habit number 2. Make your faith normal. It's amazing that I would have to give this advice and remember this advice myself. Because a lot of Catholics are not normal about their faith. A lot of religious people aren't normal about their faith. It's like some weird thing. But remember, if you're going to subvert the culture, you have to be incredibly subtle. Right? Spy work is different than ordinary missionary work. Right? Here's words that nobody's ever said in human history. Great news, folks. There's missionaries on the porch. Pretend we're not home. You know? And especially at Harvard. I mean, come on. Right? You want to kick down people's doors and shove a crucifix in their face and be all weird about our faith? Good luck to your apostolate. Good luck to you. No. This is subtler, what we're trying to do. Religious people are strange and forced about their faith a lot. They're defensive about it. They're overly pushy about it. But that's not the clandestine way that we're trying to get our faith across. We have to make our faith normal and natural as wearing a shirt to work. Normal, natural. If you want to be a spy, you have to make things normal. You gotta blend in. Now, why do we, in many cases, find it so awkward? This is a question I often ask myself. It's a question I ask myself as a social scientist. Why do we act weird and unnatural about our faith? And the truth of the matter is that it sort of makes sense because our culture normalizes the pathological and pathologizes the normal. We're made to feel as if we're doing a weird thing. We're doing the most normal thing in human history, which is worshiping the divine. Meanwhile, the culture normalizes truly pathological things. Our faith is weird. Meanwhile, we take bad and shocking things and say, see, no big deal. Right? Amazing. People talk openly about using pornography today. If you're scandalized, the weird one is you, man. Lighten up. Are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? But we can learn something from this, really important from this, which is that when we make things normal, people are pretty shocked, and then they find it winsome, and they want to follow. Let me give you a couple of examples of this, because this might be illustrative, it might be helpful. For years, I've had a friend who teaches at Oxford. He's a very prominent physicist named Andrew Briggs. He's kind of a tweedy British guy. If you get in your head, physicist at Oxford, his picture pops into your mind, right? He's the world's leading expert in nanomaterials as an applied physicist. He's an amazing guy, he's a genius. At one time, he had written this book. He had written this kind of interesting book about physics and theology, about the relationship between physics and theology. And I was interviewing him in public in Washington, D.C. And I asked him sort of, why have you studied both physics and theology? He obviously has a PhD in physics. He also has a master's degree in divinity, in Christian theology. I said, why'd you do that? Why'd you study those two things? What was your intellectual interest that was crossing these apparent barriers between faith and reason? And he said, just matter of fact, I remember it very distinctly. Here's what he said. I was dedicated to science and also to my Lord Jesus Christ, so it was a perfectly logical thing to do. And he said it with this British accent, so I'm like, well, that's smart. Right? And then I said, what did he just say? What did he just say? I'm dedicated to science. I love science, but also to my Lord Jesus Christ. So it was perfectly logical. That's normalizing it. That's a master class in making faith natural. Here's another example. I didn't have a traditional college education like most of you. I actually got my college education by correspondence. I missed my first chance. I didn't miss my first chance. I dropped out of college or dropped out, kicked out, splitting hairs. First time through. And I found myself pursuing my excellence outside of college at age 19. I went on the road as a musician all the way through my 20s, a classical musician. That's why I wound up in Spain and started my life in Spain, and my family life, got married. It was great. It was a gap decade that I had, right? In my late 20s, I went back to school by correspondence because I didn't have any money. And I felt that it was time to do something new, and I was interested in some other things. I wanted to study economics and psychology and all the kind of cool stuff that I get to do today, really great. And the correspondence school where I got my degree was a place called Thomas Edison State University in Trenton, New Jersey. It's a correspondence school, but it sounds completely legit, right? Like a regular university. It's actually a part of the New Jersey system. It turns out that registrars know what it is because when I applied to Harvard for graduate education, it took them 2 weeks to say no. Right? Turns out I was a French horn playing 30-year-old college dropout with a correspondence school degree is not the core demographic of this university. Who knew? But about 25 years later, after I got my bachelor's degree, a month before my 30th birthday, in the mail, they asked me to come back and be the keynote speaker and take an honorary degree from Thomas Edison State University. Now, what's graduation at a correspondence school? Is it like 8 guys sitting around a conference table? I don't know, but it turns out it was this massive affair at the Trenton ice rink where the hockey team plays. And I got there, I didn't know who was going to be there. It was 5,000 people screaming for their families. And it was hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of graduates of this correspondence university, this distance learning, non-traditional education. Most of them first-generation college graduates, about half of them military, and these were my people when I was the graduation speaker. I don't remember what I talked about. I'm sure it was not memorable, but I do remember one thing from that experience, which was that everybody got to cross the stage as they were getting their diplomas, and they got to say, Their name and one thing. There were so many of them who would have taken hours that they gave their little speeches themselves as the graduates. They would say, my name is so-and-so, and they'd say one sentence, they got to move on, move on, move on, move on. It was an assembly line. And this one lady, I remember, had a big impression on me. She's walking across the stage, and she stops, and she's 45 or 50 years old, and she's got lines on her face. She's lived, right? She just got her bachelor's degree. And she says, for this moment, I want to thank my 5 children and the Son of the living God. Boom. Right? Cheers, right? And I'm thinking, she didn't have to say that. She didn't have to say that. She didn't have to put up her little advertisement for Jesus, but it was written on her heart. That was her soul. That's what she wanted to say. Would you have the courage to say that? You, fellow Christians, would you have the courage to say that? Make your Catholic faith normal, like most normal things you do. Now, I do a lot these days because I teach happiness and I write books about happiness, and I do a lot of modern media, that means podcasting and different sorts of things on YouTube, etc. And I'm on all these super high human performance podcasts. I'm with all these bodybuilders, and it's a very interesting subculture. And they'll always ask me about my routine. So my routine is, I get up at 4:45 in the morning, and I do 60 minutes of intense weight training, make sure I get my 10,000 steps in, I get 200 grams of protein a day, and I go to Mass every day. They're like, what? What's that last part? Because that is part of how you make it natural. And it better be natural. Okay, habit number 3. Make your faith attractive. Make it magnetic. Make people want it. People say our society is troubled by anger. People say our campus is troubled by anger. Actually, it's being ruined by a more complex emotion than anger. Anger is a basic negative emotion that proceeds from activity in the amygdala. It's an incredible thing that gives you either fight or flight, whether you have fear or anger itself. Relatively basic, but it's a hot negative emotion that says, I care. There's an incredible statistic that I've seen replicated again and again and again, that anger is uncorrelated with divorce. Anger and divorce are uncorrelated. Incredibly good news for me, married to a Spaniard. Lots of anger, no divorce. She's back there going, yeah. The problem in our society and on our campus is not anger. It's actually a complex emotion called contempt, which takes anger, a hot emotion, and mixes it with an ice-cold emotion called disgust, another basic negative emotion. And when you take anger and disgust and put them together, you get this complex contempt that basically describes the worthlessness of another individual. That's what contempt really is. That's how Arthur Schopenhauer, the great 19th century philosopher, defined contempt, the conviction of the worthlessness of another person. Now, that's the most destructive thing that you can exhibit towards somebody else. If you want a permanent enemy, express contempt. The marriage psychologist, probably the man who's most responsible for understanding marital happiness, is John Gottman, a psychologist at the University of Washington in Seattle. He runs the Gottman Marriage Laboratory with his wife, Julie. And Gottman has found that the biggest predictor of divorce actually is expressions of contempt. Eye-rolling, derision, sarcasm. This will poison your marriage. It will poison any relationship that you have. If you look at our political conflicts around today, they're all characterized by contempt. Eye-rolling and sarcasm, and that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. You disagree with me, you should be cast into outer darkness. That's also what characterizes a lot of the culture on our campus. I think we need a campaign called Make Harvard Happy Again. What would that require? That would require a war on contempt, because that's how we talk about people who disagree with us ideologically. Catholics should not be guilty of that. Should not be expressing contempt. On the contrary, we don't need enemies. We need friends. Anger's okay in small doses. Now, here's the good news. People hate contempt. People don't like it. And it's one of the reasons that we're so unhappy in our country, and oftentimes even right here at home at our university. But a lot of people don't see very many alternatives to the culture of contempt that we have ideologically around us. That's our opportunity. This is our secret weapon, is the discomfort and unhappiness that we have surrounding this culture of contempt. Why? Because we have the most single transgressive teaching ever propagated to the human race, I dare say. You've heard that you should love your friends and hate your enemies, but today I give you new teaching. Love your enemies. Pray for those who persecute you. How weird is that? That is the most bizarre thing I've ever heard. And yet, it's possible, isn't it? At least, it's supposed to be possible. To do that, of course, you have to understand that love is the feeling. Back to Aquinas. To love is to will the good of the other. It's a commitment. It's a decision. It's an act to will the good of the other. And that's how you love your enemies, and that's how you redeem them. Now, I didn't make that up either. There was a very important, I was going to say homily, but it's a sermon because it was from a Protestant pastor, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., November 17, 1957, in the Dexter Street Baptist Church, when he preached on Matthew 5:44, love your enemies. Incredible sermon. You can see it on YouTube. I mean, you can hear it on YouTube. There's a recording of it. He had the flu. And still, it's one of the most beautiful things you'll have ever heard. Here's what he said. Love has within it a redemptive power. And there is a power there that eventually transforms individuals. That's why Jesus says, love your enemies. Because if you hate your enemies, you have no way to redeem and to transform your enemies. But if you love your enemies, you will discover that at the very root of love is the power of redemption. This is intensely practical, my friends, and it is dignified of Catholic counterinsurgents, people behind the lines, people who are trying to do their work in a subtle way. When you go out and you find the hatred, when you find the contempt, you meet it with love, notwithstanding your feelings. Like, I've learned this in lots of different ways over the years. I'm no saint, and sometimes I've only found this by accident. But I'll give you an example. Years ago, I wrote a book. The first book I ever wrote that anybody read. I'd written a number of books that no human had read, including my family. Welcome to academia. But the first book I ever read, a weird thing happened because it was just as data-filled and boring with appendices as anything I'd ever written. But something happened. It crossed the news cycle in just the right way, and the President of the United States said he was reading it, and suddenly I was in the press. And it changed my career permanently. I was just beavering away in happy professorial obscurity at Syracuse in those days, and suddenly my phone started ringing. And I went to the White House, and it was kind of a permanent change in my professional life, I have to tell you. But the interesting thing was I started hearing from strangers for the first time. You don't hear from very many strangers when you're a professor because your work is ordinarily pretty esoteric. But when you have a book that the president is reading, then people pick it up from Amazon, they start reading it, and they think they know you. When somebody reads your book, they feel like they know you. And they'll write you an email if you have a public email, which you do if you're a professor, unfortunately. And if they like the book, they like you, and they tell you about their grandma. And if they hate the book, they hate you, and they tell you that. And I started to get hate mail for the first time in my life. It wasn't a very controversial book. It was about who gives to charity and who doesn't give to charity, and the fact that a lot of the people in our society who think they give to charity are not the ones who actually do. That's all it was. And so a lot of people who disagreed with the hypothesis wrote to me and told me that. And one email I got from a guy, I remember, about 2 months after I wrote the book, it was a Wednesday or a Thursday, it was in my office, it was an afternoon, an email comes in from a guy in Texas. Dear Professor Brooks, you're a fraud. Bad way to start email, But I'm a good sport. I'm reading all my email at this point. A practice I've long given up. And he went, and I noticed that this email, by the way, that starts this way, is 5,000 words long. It's going to take me 20 minutes to read it, right? And I'm plowing my way through it. But here's the thing that I noticed when I'm about 2/3 of the way through the email. This guy is responding to everything in my book. Like, in great vitriolic detail, by the way. The columns in table 3.1 are reversed, you moron. I mean, stuff like that. But what was going through my head was actually paradoxical. I was thinking to myself, he read my book. I mean, nobody reads my books. I was so flattered by the fact that he was, picking out every detail. He clearly read every word of my book. And the appendices, too, is amazing. So I thought to myself, I'm just going to tell him what's written on my heart right now. That's all I'm going to do. I'm going to write back to him, tell him what I'm feeling. Because I'm never going to meet him. So I write back, dear so-and-so, I know you hated my book and you hated me and everything's terrible and I'm terrible. You made this very clear. But you took a lot of time to read my book, and it took me 2 years to write that book, and I put my whole heart into it. The fact that you read every word fills me with gratitude. Thank you. Send. And then I go back to work. You know, I'm just running some regression analyses on my computer. I'm being a real nerd. And I'll never hear from this guy again. No. 15 minutes later, ding, there's his email. And now I'm very apprehensive because maybe he wants to kill me. I don't know. Dear Professor Brooks, he says, next time you're in Dallas, give me a call and we can get some dinner. What? What happened? What's going on here? And the answer is, his heart changed when I showed him a little bit of love. And I wasn't trying to be virtuous. I'm not this virtuous person. I'm just a sinner like everybody else. But this had this magical impact. You know, by the way, I never did have dinner with him. I'd probably be chained to a pipe in his basement right now. I'm not that perfect, right? But I learned my lesson, right? This is our secret weapon, loving our enemies, praying for those who persecute us. This is how you make it magnetic, is by going into the missionary field as somebody who loves in the spirit of a culture full of hate. And we can do it. We're promised that in the Bible, but we're also, I can promise you this as a social scientist as well. You have to decide to do it. Stop following your feelings. They lie. Follow your brain, which God gave you to make you a subversive Catholic. Nothing is more subversive than refusing to return hate. That's Jesus' point. Let me summarize, then we'll have time for a conversation. Our culture, it's in crisis, but there's nothing new about that. It's always been in crisis. Nothing new under the sun. It's not worse than it's ever been. Maybe better in some ways, but it's still in crisis. And we need people who are willing to do the work to subvert the crisis and do so with joy. That's you, and that's me. Remember that the true formula for the best life is simple, but hard. Use things, love people, worship God. That's what we're trying to install all around the culture. And then with joy, subvert the culture publicly and normally and magnetically. Look, God made us Catholic for a reason. I think. I don't think it's random. I think that we're Christian people because we are here to subvert the culture, because we are countercultural people. And he wants us to do it with joy. It's not just a deal to get into the heaven. We want to make heaven a little bit, make earth a little bit more like heaven here. And that's how we do it. So let me ask all of you to join me and think of this day as a call into the mission field. Or more importantly, this is a call into the Blessed Virgin Mary's clandestine service. To all of you, you're now commissioned. Thank you very much. It's on.
Is mine on? Can people hear me? Yes? No?
That should work out.
Oops. I'll hold it in front of me.
Or on the lapel, it'll look better probably.
I'll hold it right here.
Okay.
All right. Thank you so much. Let me begin with a question that takes off from the beginning of your talk, when you talked about Thomas Aquinas and the things that we seek being power and money and our own interest and so on. And I'm wondering about the epidemic, really, of depression and self-hatred we see in self-harm and so on in today's culture. It didn't quite seem to fit into that. And I wonder if you could address that.
Yeah, sure. So I talk a lot about the mental health crisis on campus, but among young adults and among all people in the United States and places around the world. And it's absolutely true. We find just on the basis of not clinical depression and generalized anxiety, but happiness measures. We find that happiness has been in decline in the United States generally since 1990. Year after year after year, little by little by little, but we know why. We actually know why. And this is a really good opportunity for us when we recognize and pay attention to the causes, because the causes actually imply the cures. There's a kind of a climate problem and a weather problem. The generalized decreases in happiness. I'm speaking metaphorically, obviously. The climate reasons are the declines in the 4 big things that make people happier now, today, tomorrow, yesterday, and forever, which is faith, family, friends, and work. Those are the 4 things that bring happiness to people. Now, by faith, I don't necessarily mean my faith. I like my faith best, and I'm not going to say which is metaphysically right, although I have my opinions on that too. But I will tell you that as a social scientist, that the serious practice of faith or spirituality or life philosophy makes you transcend the psychodrama of day-to-day life. It absolutely has no replacement in the life of the happiest people. Second is family life, the mystical relationships of the bonds of love you did not choose, and God knows you would not have in many cases. Friendship, real friendship, not deal friendship, real friendship. And last but not least, work that serves. Work as an apostolate, work as a holy vocation. And that means we earn our success through excellence and we serve our sisters and brothers. That's been in decline. All 4 of those things have been in decline since 1990. We find that people are less likely to practice any sort of faith, spirituality, or life philosophy, that people are less likely to get married and form families, people are less likely to say that somebody knows me well and have deep friendships, and people are less likely to see their work as a calling and vocation. Less and less and less. And this is what's decrementing the happiness level and spiking the mental illness indicators. Now, there's 3 storms that have made it worse. They're super important for us to pay attention to. 2008, 2016, and 2020. 3 storms. You know what they are. 2008, 2009, we saw a major downdraft in happiness, especially among young adults. And initially I thought, I'm an economist, it's the financial crisis. They can't find jobs. Wrong. That's when Instagram went on the phones. That's when social media became ubiquitous on personal devices. It was 2008, 2009. And that's when, especially young adults, especially women and girls aged 15 through 24, started to really see mental health crises spiraling in our society. We could talk about that if you want. Second, 2016, 2017, and on. That was when the culture war, as instantiated in ideological differences in politics in this country, started to solidify in the ways that we see them today. After the 2016 election, 1 in 6 Americans was not talking to a family member because of politics. That is insane. You know, there's only one reason, I can tell you, as a social scientist, that's legitimate reason to have schism with your family, and that's abuse. And political differences of opinion are not abuse, notwithstanding what any commentator will tell you on any television network or your favorite columnist, or et cetera, et cetera. That was a huge problem. In other words, the culture of contempt and hatred and ideological division that persists to this day is the second big reason that mental health crises are spiking, especially on campuses where these culture wars are particularly acute, and around the country in general where happiness is declining. And last but not least is our old friend, the coronavirus. This was an almost perfectly diabolical way to make people sad, depressed, and lonely, is make them all go home and stay there. I mean, we're social animals. It's 6 months into the lockdowns, depression symptomology, which is to say the threshold of being clinically designated as somebody with clinical depression, quadrupled 6 months after the onset of the lockdowns around this country, and they haven't gone down. They haven't gone down because a lot of people still haven't gone out really in meaningful ways. It's amazing. I mean, Esther and I, our youngest daughter was a senior in high school. She never once went, just sat at the table, looking at the laptop. It's the most depressing thing ever. She made a run for the border after high school to just get out, go do something. But a lot of people didn't, and they haven't come back yet. That's what we see. And that's what we need to be actually providing truth and light toward. We need to give people solutions to that and providing them with the love that they actually need. And that's what we can do as Christian people, is taking on these problems.
Thank you. Christianity gives us a very radical critique of material things. You talk about using things. There is a strain, certainly, in Christianity about give away all your wealth and follow me, take up your cross and follow me. And I'm wondering how that fits with an ethic that's based on happiness.
One of the things that we know is that the more people give, the happier they get. Now, I'm not a monk. You know, I haven't given. I'm not a mendicant. I don't live in rags. But the point of the matter is that we're supposed to offer up and do all that we do for the good of the Lord and the good of our brothers and sisters. And so one of the ways that we can sell all that we own and follow the Lord, I dare say, one of the ways that we can do that at Harvard University and the other fancy places around the world is to have an order of operations for the work that we do. I've thought about this a lot. You know, I was a CEO until about 5 years ago of a big nonprofit organization in Washington, D.C. And I left, and it was on the basis of discernment of what I thought God's role in my life was, or what I was supposed to do. You know, we always pray, Lord, guide my path, but we never really mean it, because it's kind of hard. I really meant it. I really meant it. And I thought a lot about what I wanted to do. And I realized that there was going to be an order of operations for the rest of my life. And everything had to follow this order of operations. First in line is glorifying God. Second in line is serving others. Third is the worldly stuff. I wanted to have an adventure, and last but not least, I'm in a privileged position of having last be to make a living. Lucky for me. But the whole point is glorify God and serve other people had to come first, and all of us can do that with our work. That's how ordinary work is sanctified. You don't have to literally sell everything that you own. You just have to offer it up, is dedicate it, to christen it to the good of others and to the glorification of the Lord. That's selling all that you own and following Jesus, as far as I'm concerned. We need you to be lawyers. Now, we don't need to be lawyers, but we need I'm kidding. We need you to do your secular, ordinary work, because we need your apostolate out there doing that, but we need you to dedicate it to the Lord and thus follow the Gospels in that way. That's my view.
There were a number of questions around this, and you did talk about it a lot in your talk, but really about how we as Catholics or as Christians in an everyday, practical way approach these very controversial issues that we come up with in close relationships with people,
right,
public situations, and so on. Any further thoughts on that?
Yeah, we're going to deal with controversies. That's just the fact, because there's disagreement, and disagreements are bitter, and they're around really very, very personal issues. That's true. The reason that we weigh in on this is because they're part of our values, and they're part of our Christian faith, and we can't stay out of the arena. So the question is, how do you do that? Here's the rule to keep in mind. There's not one specific formula in every argument, from research issues to really hot topics like abortion. There's no one formula for doing this, but here's a kind of a rule of thumb. If you're using your values as a weapon, you're doing it wrong. If you're using your values as a gift, you're doing it right. If I come to your house and I have a bouquet of flowers, and you open the door and I smack you in the face with the flowers, it's not going to be compelling. You're not going to say, oh, Brooks loves me. No. You're going to call the cops. And that's what we do too much when we're in these arenas. We use our values effectively as a weapon. So the question is, how do you share these things as a gift in a spirit of love? It may not be interpreted as such, but your heart has to be right about these things. You have to be sharing these things in difficult conversations, because you love somebody enough to share these things in a difficult conversation. Do you love people enough to do that? Do you love people enough to put yourself on line? That's hard. That's a big gift, and it may not be appreciated. But if it's a weapon, you've lost all of the moral impact, and you've lost the argument before it started.
Perhaps this is a final question, and this question came in a number of different ways. This is one. How should we react when we believe that the church itself is tolerating or even embracing behaviors antithetical to Christianity?
Yeah. So the idea that the church is tolerating or even encouraging ideas and behaviors that are antithetical to Christianity means, newsflash, the church is run by people. which is a big problem from the very beginning. That's just the way it is, and it's the way it's going to be. And fellow sinners are running the church. What do we have to understand about that? To begin with, we tend to be incredibly clerical as Catholics, which means that we're super shocked and totally paralyzed when the clergy do things that we think they shouldn't do. That's the wrong way of seeing it. We're the church. We're the church. Lay people are the biggest part of the church. And we're really imperfect too. And we're leading things astray too. So what do? What are you supposed to do? I mean, what does St. John say that you do when you see somebody who's sinning? You correct them fraternally and you pray for them. And that's the same thing that we should be doing for our church, and doing so with confidence and doing so with enthusiasm and doing so with love. When something isn't right, you say it. But you say it in the spirit of love, and you don't get angry, you don't walk away, you don't go into schism. It's a really important thing that we understand, that we as church members have a responsibility to do so, but we have the privilege to do so, and we can do it with confidence if we actually all hang together and love each other enough. That's my view.
And on that note, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Professor Gilbert, were you going to come up again for a moment? Please.
I'm so sorry.
You need to come over for the microphone. Yeah.
That's unmuted.
Do finish for us.
Last week
There.
See, that's Arthur, just living his sermon. Last week, I had the pleasure of sharing a talk about Christians living an integrated life in the public square. And we've heard this amazing talk today from Professor Brooks, urging us to be authentic in the way that we live our faith and in the way that we engage with the world. And I'd like to say that there is no plan B. When Jesus died on the cross for you and for me, that plan of salvation is the plan. There is no plan B. And all of our innovation and all of our devices and all of the things that we have managed to rely on to dull the pain, to distract us from the tragedy and to divert us from all of the brokenness of the world has only made things worse. You are a living epistle. And what God has called us to do as Christians is to take the good news of the gospel into a lost and dying world. And some may say no, but there are many who are seeking and who are hungry and who are thirsty for the living water, for the bread of life. And so why don't we give Professor Brooks a hand of applause again for reminding us of that truth.